Well, we're on the subject of how you write and the mechanics. When you described Grant's writing as West Pointian, what about your own? How would you describe your writing?
Well, I have different voices. I'm a mimic, and I can mimic, or used to, when younger and more alert voice. And also, being a dramatist, I can make scenes and people actually talk in different voices, which conform with whatever their characters are. If I'm impersonating a Roman emperor, I will have one style for Julian. Myra Breckinridge has a style never before heard or seen on this earth. She is furious, terrible clamor in my head as I was putting her down. So there are different styles.
In fact, let me show the cover for the paperback of Myra Breckinridge as we take our next telephone call, and it is from Seattle.
Hello, Mr. Vidal. I really appreciate your books, and I was wondering if you'd comment on the use of covert activity from the time of Burr through Lincoln, and now that we're spending $30 billion on covert activity to actually controls our foreign affairs. How do you... I mean, all the people are interested in spies, but most people don't believe that, are not interested in really knowing what's going on with our CIA in this country.
Well, I deplore our secret government, which the CIA is. I deplore the Los Angeles Police Department, which used to have a foreign policy, and they were against enemies of the Vietnam War, which I was. The whole country is becoming a police state. Here's a statistic that I saw on the front page of USA Today about a week ago. There are 6 million people in prison or in what they call in correction. I suppose that's parole or reform schools or something. 6 million people, that's 3% of the adult population. No other country has ever imprisoned so many of its own people proportionately as we have done. What is this about? The harassment of Americans. Have you taken a trip by plane lately? I have to travel with a passport in my pocket in my own country.
Well, we have to have an ID with a picture.
Well, why do you have to have an ID with a picture? If I'm a terrorist, I'm going to have a fake one, you fool. This harassment never lets up. We now have in New York, there's every taxi cab.
Buckle up, this is Edith Wharton.
Well, you know, a government that does not care enough about us to give us a national health service, which other countries have, is terribly worried that we may go through the windshield. This constant harassment of the people. And one day I think they're going to rise up and tear this damn thing to pieces. Would that I were young, and it was spring, and very heaven to be there.
Hometown next, Washington, D.C.
Mr. Vidal, what a pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you.
My favorite of yours was Lincoln, and I picked it up for the first time 10 years ago, having never paid too much attention to historical fiction. I then embarked on a reading campaign over the course of 5 years. Sandberg, Bruce Catton. It just brought history alive for me in a way that no one else had. And indeed, you will live on. These books that I'm standing in my apartment looking at now, my son will inherit, and of course his children will. And hopefully from it will come an historian that you so admire. So I have a question. I've noticed an attitude of disrespect that's being embraced by scholars, by teachers, by schools toward the accomplishments of our forefathers. Not just our politicians, our leaders, but our business leaders in general in this country. Many people feel this ties in with the changing demographics of this country. How do you feel?
I wouldn't use the word disrespect. I think analysis, and it's not brilliant analysis because the people in our universities are rather timid and conform for a lot of reasons. But I think that many people are asking questions. Why have we come to the point that I have to carry a passport in the United States so that I have ID with a picture? Over the years, attempts have been made for us to have cards of identity, which fascist states require, and Bonaparte-style democracies also require, like Italy and France. This is alien to the American tradition, and yet now they've got it. I don't know how a diners club with a picture on it is identification of any kind, but anyway, that's what they want. The constant intrusion, the getting hold of your social security number, what they're doing now on the internet and buying things, and they have records. They keep thorough records on just about everybody. I think if there is disrespect for that, I think that's good. And if there is curiosity about how we got into this state, most people think the CIA was always there. It wasn't. It was founded in 47, 48. It's totally illegal, unconstitutional, I should say. It does not submit its accounts to Congress as the Constitution requires. Lately, they have seemed to be conforming to the law, but I rather doubt it. It's totally a rogue out there. We have so many secret services that we don't know anything about them. And we have so many activities going on abroad that we will never know anything about because they are kept obscure from us. Remember, David Hume said in 1745, he said, "How are the many, who are many and so powerful, and thus powerful, controlled by the few, who are few and less powerful?" He said, "It is done through opinion, and opinion is formed by the schools and the churches and the broadsheets," which is what they call newspapers then. "He who controls religion, who controls education and the press, the class that does, will create any opinion that it wants, to do anything that it wants. If it's in England, they want a war with France, opinion will go against the French." I've been reading American opinion all my life. I have never read a story in the American press that was favorable to any other society. We are constantly bad-mouthing every other country on earth, and we're the greatest, we're the greatest, we're the greatest. Everybody envies us. We're so good. Sweden, yes, they have better education, better health service, better daycare centers for working mothers, but they're all alcoholics, and they kill themselves, as though because you have good health and good education, you will be so bored with your life that you will want to commit suicide and get drunk. This constant drip torture of misinformation has really skewed the entire country. No one knows what to think about anything. I think a great many people have just pulled out. They just ignore the constant propaganda. Yes, we do get a lot of fairly true information, but who can wade through it? It comes at us in such avalanches. Changing times.
Palm Springs, California, for Gore Vidal.
Thank you for C-SPAN, and thank you for this interview with Mr. Vidal. My name is Joanna, and I met you, Gore. I had the great fortune of meeting you in Rome, and also to have lunch with you in Ravello. Together with my friend Joan, we would use mind dynamics for an encounter with you in the Piazza del Pantheon. I even wrote anonymous notes saying, "Gore Vidal, you are so beautiful." That was 15 years ago. Now I would like to say to you, Mr. Vidal, you are too beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Vidal.
Well, thank you. I haven't received a compliment like that in at least 15 years.
Milwaukee.
Mr. Vidal, I work for a radio station, and I'm very protective of people's trust of daily journalism, whether it's from broadcasting or newspapers. And I remember seeing a movie 25 years ago called Network, in which he warned, Patty Chasky warned us of messengers who would come and say, "Don't trust the mass media, trust me." And he would lead them in a direction, plus inform them at the same time. And are we getting closer to an age of that, where we have people who call themselves the messengers? The mass media is not reporting this, but I'm the one that's telling you this inside information, and here's the direction that our government and society should be headed. Is this something new, or has this always happened in various forms in American history?
Well, governments generally mislead us, and then again, messengers generally have the wrong message. So that there is no generality that we can make out of this situation. I think the opinion, in the sense that David Hume used it, is constant and is generally self-serving, in this case for the government of the United States. There are messengers, there are voices that are telling the truth, that are useful. However, everything that a government can do to silence Noam Chomsky or me, that's an example, they will do. I talked to Chomsky. I was up at Harvard giving a lecture, and they had flyers all around the Harvard yard saying where I was to be speaking, what time. About several hundred of them. Within 30 minutes, they'd all been torn down. There was no mention that I was there in the Harvard Crimson, no message in the Boston papers. I drew 2,000 or 3,000 people. That was the day I saw Chomsky. And he said, I explained it, he said, well, they do that to me too. I said, okay. And it's all across the country this happens. Because opinion does not want us to be heard. I said, okay, how is it that we draw 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people? How do they know we're there? And Chomsky said, I think it's mystical. I don't know how. There is some sort of underground out there that knows when something interesting is going to happen. So that's how we messengers get around, caller. We are drawn by the underground. The underground has pulled us into their orbit.
Who is tearing down the flyers?
At that time, I should think what is called neoconservatives were the most motivated.
Next call, Idaho Falls. That's in Idaho. Go ahead, please.
Hello. I was interested by your comment where you mentioned that American history has been dealt from a very small deck. The Adams family seems to be part of this deck, which is distinct from your connections. And you talked about Brooks Adams. I guess I was interested if you could elaborate a little more on this person. He's the one Adams member of the Adams clan that I have a lot of trouble finding out anything about.
It's a very good biography of Brooks Adams. I have a copy of it. Don't ask me the author's name. I'm at that stage of my... In the springtime of my senility, I'm beginning to lose names right and left. But Brooks Adams, there is a good biography of him. There's a great deal written about him. And he, of course, wrote a great deal. And he was sort of... he figures in a novel of mine called Empire, if you want to see what I have done with him. I have a very funny scene when he announces that McKinley has been shot. And he comes rushing down, and Henry Adams, the Adamses are staying up in New England for the summer. And McKinley's been shot, and their friend Theodore Roosevelt is now president. And Brooks Adams, and whenever I have a scene with a real person like Brooks Adams, I take it from letters, I take it from life. And he came rushing down the lawn, and he said, he will be greater than Trajan, he will be greater than all the great Roman emperors, and so on. Sort of a hymn to empire. But Brooks had all sorts of curious notions. I talked earlier on the program about Shanxi province in China, which was very rich in minerals and so on. He who controlled it would control the world, and that was a Brooks Adams proposition. He also figured out at the time of the First World War, he said, Germany is too small a country to... He had a funny image, simile, to swing the hammer, some phrase like that. They're far too small. They'll find at the end of this war there are only two great powers standing, United States and Russia, which is right on. He is to be read. And then the deterioration of the democratic process. I can't remember if that was he or Henry Adams, or did he edit Henry Adams. But I associate that with him. But get him, he's well worth reading.
Well, speaking of characters in your book, I think we might have sidestepped an earlier caller's question about Dutch and the technique of inserting fictional characters into biography. Also, Edmund Morris, the author, is in that book, as you are in your most recent book, The Golden Age. What do you think about this whole technique, and does it belong in biography as opposed to historical fiction?
Well, historical fiction is a curious phrase. If it's fiction, it's not history. If it's history, it's not fiction. I have worked out a blend over the years in which my history is history. The historical figures do what they did. and say what they did, pretty much. Then I have made-up characters to mix with them. I know Edmund Morris slightly, and it may well be that he might have picked up something from me along the way about the mixture. I haven't read Dutch, but I gather from what I've heard about it that he makes himself a very major character. I'm a very small character. In the Golden Age, I'm just there at the end to bring down the curtain and give my Prospero speech, and our revels now are ended, and to contemplate what is history, what is real, what is fact. I've dealt with it all through the series, with William Randolph Hearst inventing wars, inventing news, and then historians working from his inventions, and then what is real. And then I come back to a Henry Adams image, which is all is energy. And he had this image of the dynamo, which would be the great 20th century God. It is energy, it is force that matters. And matter that matters is force.
Well, may I get you to read just one other paragraph while you're speaking about the closing of this book? This is your view of the human race.